Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. I'm Larry Swikart, co-author of Patriots History of the United States with Michael Allen. You know, it's one of these things, somewhere, somehow, people got in their mind that Mike Allen's name was Michael Patrick Allen. It is not. He is not Michael Patrick Allen. And I'll tell you, the one thing that grabs my goat more than anything is when people call our book a Patriot's Guide. That's the competitor, the politically incorrect guide. Our book is so much better than that. It's a Patriot's history, just so you got that. Okay, so this is going to be a very long section. I looked at this. We're in chapter 14. We're looking at progressivism. And this particular unit is called Progressive Reformers. It starts on page, let's see, where are we? Get some light. 513 um, in the 15th anniversary edition. So I am using the 15th anniversary edition. Now, I've updated the book with two new chapters. They are both out for proofing and review. I've gotten one proof back. We're all good to go. I made those changes. I'm waiting for Mike Allen's proof to make further changes. It was a little long. I think I had it like 150 pages, and so I chopped it dramatically to get it down to where it's reasonable. But in the beginning of this new chapter 23, um, which is free PDF. If you want it, just email me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com. But I would wait 2 or 3 weeks until we get chapter 24 proofread as well, and I can send you both of them. At any rate, what I'm trying to say is you'll get on the front of this new chapter about 20 pages of inserts that go throughout the book at various points. And I've stopped and read those inserts. You can use them or not, but we are using the 15th anniversary edition of Patriots History of the United States. So if you have an earlier edition, the page numbers won't line up, and sometimes the headers are different. Not all of them, but a few of them. So I am now on page 513 of Patriots History of the United States, Progressive Reformers. While the Wright brothers aspired to reach the heavens quite literally through technology, another movement sought the kingdom of heaven through more spiritual means. Revivals, of course, have played a prominent role in the first and second great awakenings of the colonial era and Jacksonian periods. Following in the paths blazed by evangelists such as Charles G. Finney and holiness leader Charles Parham, evangelists routinely hit the dusty trails to rouse the morally sleeping masses for the Lord. In the late 1800s, many Americans had adopted either a more formal liturgical stance aligned with the major traditional churches, such as the Lutherans, for example, or had joined the growing sea of secularists. But in 1905, spiritual shockwaves hit Los Angeles, spread from a revival in Wales. The Welsh revival was so powerful that the number of drunkenness arrests fell over a 3-year period, and the miners cleaned up their language so much horses reportedly could no longer understand their commands. The revival reached the United States through traveling ministers to the American holiness churches, where a number of prophecies foretold a massive revival that would descend on California. A year later, in April 1906, a church on Azusa Street in Los Angeles, as Elder William Seymour began praying with local church members, the Azusa Christians began to speak in other tongues, technically called glossolalia. This was a biblical phenomenon that occurred at Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit filled the believers, and at that time they spoke in other tongues, that is, they spoke in languages they did not know. Crowds packed the area around the house, growing so large that the foundation of the front porch collapsed. Eventually, the prayer services, which by now were going on 24 hours a day, had to be moved to an old African Methodist Episcopal AME church nearby. As word of the Azusa Street Revival spread, it became clear this was an interracial event, often with women conducting important parts of the services or prayers. Inevitably, divisions and schisms appeared, and some of the early members left or otherwise lost their influence until finally, between 1909 and 1913, depending on whether one counts a second revival that occurred at the same location, the revival ended. The Azusa Street Revival gave birth to the modern charismatic Pentecostal movement in America, setting the spiritual stage for dozens of charismatic denominations in the United States. An even larger movement, that of the social gospel, sprang from mainstream Protestant ministers who emphasized social justice over perfecting the inner man and the relationship of Christians to others in society. Social gospel advocates included Washington Gladden, an Ohio Congregational minister, Walter Rauschenbusch, a New York Baptist preacher, and Kansan Charles Sheldon, whose In His Steps book sold 23 million copies. Most social gospelers endorse minimum wage and child labor laws. You know, I just noticed something. We have a period missing in our book. Hmm. It's amazing. You read this a million times. I can't tell you how many times I've read this thing, proofread it, Mike's read it, editors have read it, and we still find something where we're missing a period after 23 million copies. Okay. Most social gospelers endorsed minimum wage and child labor laws, favored redistribution as wealth, and generally embraced state regulation business. So they were like little Marxists. To do so usually involves significant revisions of the Bible, and many, though not all, social gospelers abandon any claims about Scripture's literal accuracy. First warning sign. Instead, the social gospelers viewed the Bible as a moral guidebook, but no more than that. These modernists also abandoned theological dogmatism for greater tolerance of other faiths. Ecumenism is what it's called, always a danger as well. Um, I'm not saying that any one faith necessarily is right, but they may be right, but only one faith could be right. They can't all be right, right? They could all be wrong, but only one can be right. Uh, Secularist reformers continued the quest for perfectionism with something like religious zeal. They wielded great influence in the first decade of the new century. By 1912, progressives found adherents in both political parties and had substantial support from women who supported health and safety laws and prohibition and temperance legislation. In turn, women's suffrage became a centerpiece of all progressive reform. Theodore Roosevelt had done much to dull the campaign issues of food and drug reform and trust busting. Individual states initiated many progressive ideas for direct election of judges, popular initiative for legislation that the state assembly did not wish to bring up, public referrals on unpopular bills advanced by the legislatures, and recall of public officials. Indeed, Arizona's statehood had been held up until 1912 because its constitution had all these features: initiative, referendum, and recall. In education as well, progressive reforms had led to the introduction of tenure in university faculties on the grounds of academic freedom, removing professors just a bit more from control by governing bodies. Then in 19, by the way, you'll see one of the reforms that conservatives usually tout is we got to get rid of tenure. Well, maybe. I'm just here to tell you, without tenure, I probably would not have been able to stay at the university I was at. And it was a pretty good university, but nevertheless, it was left leaning like most of them. And I think without tenure, I probably would have been gone 20 years before I left. So it's something to think about. It cuts both ways. In 1919, the Association for the Advancement of Progressive Education issued a statement on the principles of progressive education, which suggested eliminating grades and to, quote, provide with the home as much as possible of all the natural interests of the child demand, originating the notion that schools, not parents, should care for the children. By the way, this is interesting. The Bible verse says you should train a child up in a way he should go and he will never depart. Now, there's two interpretations of that. One is you should train a child up in the ways of the Bible, and sooner or later they will come back to Jesus. That's kind of the more common view. But I've heard another one that makes eminent sense, which is you should train a child up in the way they are wired to go in terms of their career and their interests. That is, if you have an artist, don't try to make him into a football player. If you have a mercenary, don't try to make him into a peace worker. I mean, we are all wired to do certain things. I'll tell you a little bit of my story if you don't know it. And by the way, you can read my biography, my autobiography. It's on the website. It's called The Rhythm of History. And I name drop a lot. I put in every name I ever met, interacted with, all the rock and rollers, everybody from the Allman Brothers to Steppenwolf, and on and on and on. But anyway, the point was, like most kids, I really didn't know what I wanted to do in life. I've played drums all the way through high school and all the way through college, but it dawned on me through a couple of instances I don't want to relate here that I was not that great a drummer. And I had a good style, a really solid style, heavy style. You could always hear me playing. I knew when I used to play for the church, people would walk in and go, "Oh, I knew you were on drums the minute I came in." But I knew I was never going to be a session musician. I knew I didn't read music well enough. And especially when you look at the way drummers are today on Facebook, you watch some of these reels, these guys are mind-bogglingly good. I couldn't have been that good if I practiced every day, 12 hours a day, every day of my life. But it was what I knew to do because I'd done it all through high school and college. I played gigs all the way through. I literally went in a van on my way to Illinois, Peoria, Illinois, the weekend of my college graduation. I was in a van on my way to play on the road, and I was on the road for the better part of several years after that. Not all the time, but most of the time. Um, Still, we always thought we might make it, and we came this close. I'd say we got closer than most, but we didn't make it. And I knew that I wasn't going to be playing rock and roll for the rest of my life. It's kind of one of those funny things that Mick Jagger said, "I don't want to be singing. I can't get no satisfaction when I'm 60." He's 80 and he's still singing it, right? So I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do the rest of my life, not because I didn't like playing the drums, but because of all of that entailed auditioning for different groups, many of whom were younger than I was. Many groups don't share the same views of how they want to make it or what. And it wasn't going to work. And just by accident, I ended up in a history class at Arizona State University that changed my life. And from that moment on, I said to the professor, "I want to be you. How do I become a history professor? What do I need to do?" And it was hard because I had terrible grades coming out of college, C plus average, which, it's Arizona State, it wasn't Harvard. Um, but that's because I was never in class. I was always, playing rock and roll or racing cars, which is something else I did at the time. But anyway, point is, I almost by accident, or you might say by God's design, I ended up in a history class with, I thought, the greatest history teacher in the world. I mean, he pushed all the right buttons for me. I know some other people wouldn't have liked him. He was a little too intellectual at times, but he was talking about historians and economists I'd never heard of in all my years of high school or the 4 years of college I'd had up to that point. People such as von Hayek and Ludwig von Mises and Milton Friedman and Leo Strauss and Eric Voegelin. And he would immediately tell you why various studies of presidents or so forth were wrong or incomplete or whatnot. And so I go, I want to become that guy. So long story short, I completely 180 degrees switched gears and became a graduate student in the history program at Arizona State University. Long story short, I got out of there with honors, straight A's, with one exception. That same teacher gave me a B plus in his historiography class. Um, Long story. I won't go into it, but nevertheless, he of course championed me all the way through and was the one who got me into the graduate program. So I ended up going to University of California, Santa Barbara, for my PhD. Along the way, somehow I picked up that um, it's publish or perish in a university, that they really did mean that, that a lot, you could be a rotten teacher, and I saw some that were rotten teachers, but if they published, they hung on. Um, I also saw people who did not get tenure because they couldn't publish a simple book review in 6 years or finish a dissertation that was already done and get it ready for a book publisher in 6 years. Um, I, on the other hand, could write a prize winning article. I did it twice, won a national prize 2 times, and I wrote it in less than a semester. So I learned you need to write, you've got to be good at writing. So I started to write all the time. Here's the kicker. I had never written anything really prior to that first history paper I wrote that won the national prize for best history. Um, I wrote a few lyrics for some songs that we did in the rock bands, and that was it. Um, so when you train the child up in the way they should go, how should I have gone? Well, I wanted to go music, but the way I needed to be trained up to go was in history. But I didn't know that until later. So this is the whole point of this idea of train the child up in the way they shall go, point them in the direction that their psyche, that their personality agree. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to send them into something like, being a drug runner or a mule or something. You don't want to do that. It means that as best as you possibly can, try to align your children with the things that interest them and the things that they are really good at. Because if you're really good at something, you like doing it. If you're really, I hate mechanical and construction work. I just hate it. Partly I hate it because I'm so bad at it. My eye doesn't see corners. I don't understand how mechanical things work very well. I just hate it, but I love to write. I love to write, and so I'm a good writer. So anyway, that's kind of my little uh, off off ramp there on train the child up in the way he should go, and he'll never depart. Um, okay, where are we? Oh yes. So this is the origin of where schools get to teach your children, not you. And it became a very, over the long term, very dangerous point in our history. Reform impulse sprang up as much in the West as in the big cities of the East. Arizona, California, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, New Mexico, Texas, Kansas, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, Oklahoma, and South Dakota all enacted women's suffrage by 1919. Progressive ideas were in the air everywhere from Virginia to Wisconsin. Professional city managers replaced city councils, and new campaigns to reform government swept from South Dakota to Texas. There was a certain illogic to the whole reform mentality, though. Full-time career politicians were venal and thus needed to be replaced with professional managers. But professional managers were also untrustworthy because they wanted the job in the first place. Jefferson and Madison's dream of part-time citizen legislators who'd convene at the Capitol, do their business, and go home to their constituents um, under assault since the Jacksonian party system now yielded further to the demands of the professionalization in politics. This is part of the whole term limits debate. Would we be better off if people had term limits? One of the arguments is, well, then they won't get so cozy with the lobbyists. That may be true, but it also will be true that they don't know who the lobbyists are or learn them well enough to know when these people are acting out of a concern for national defense, let's say, and when they just want to sell you a weapon system. Um, A lot of that experience comes from being in office for a while, knowing how to navigate bills through the legislature, which is a function of being a member of the House of Representatives or a senator. All right. The professionalization hastily eliminated corruption. I'm sorry, hardly eliminated corruption. Rather, it changed the names of those controlling the graft. I mean, seriously, look at today with U.S. aid and all of the corruption that was involved in that. It's hard to say that, well, just because these guys were professionals at doing what they did, they were less corrupt. No, they were just as corrupt as any political appointee. Under ordinary circumstances, immigrants are the object of considerable pandering, but election days brought even more extreme treatment for those who had newly arrived on American shores. Bosses trucked the immigrants to polls and paid them to vote for the machine. When possible, party loyalists voted multiple times, honoring Tweed's maxim to vote early and often. Supporters stuffed ballot boxes with the names of dead voters, wrote in fictitious residents, or conversely helped lose ballot boxes from areas where the opposing party might do well. This is the early 1900s, so not a lot's changed. Secret ballots, of course, undercut this power by hampering vote buying and also preventing illiterate citizens from voting, since they could no longer take a colored card that indicated party preference, but had to actually read a ballot. All the while, a climate of violence and larceny, and not surprisingly, organized crime, hovered around to the perimeter of political machines, occasionally swooping in to grab a contract or blackmail an official. Every ethnic group in a large city had its own mob. The Italian mafia was merely the most notorious of these. The Irish, the Jews, and subsequent decades, blacks, Puerto Ricans, Chinese, and Jamaicans all had gangs, and every gang battled every other, often in bloody shootouts. Corruption filtered down into police departments where being on the take was viewed as a legitimate bonus as long as it did not interfere with prosecuting real criminals. Um, and you can see that in a great movie with Al Pacino called Serpico, where he was an informant on the corruption of the police department. He almost got killed because of it. They shot him in the face. Law enforcement officials routinely winked as brothels, gambling rooms, even opium dens, as long as the users remained blissfully pacific in return for payola envelopes that appeared in the officers' coat pockets during daily rounds. I'm going to wrap this up because we have the long section. We got another full 4 pages to get through this section, but I want to wrap this up. And I know what you watch, your entertainments, that's kind of up to you. And I know many people don't want to see anything that has language in it, understand that. But there was a very, very good series, I think on Amazon or Netflix, I cannot remember which, about 15 years ago, called The Wire. And in The Wire, it was about a wiretap that the police detectives were getting on Anton Barksdale, a black criminal gang leader, played by Idris Elba, one of the greatest actors in the world. Anyway, in one episode, they're battling City Hall, as they always do, about crime statistics. And of course, City Hall wants crime statistics low. We saw this in DC just recently, did we not? Where DC were jimmying, lying, fudging the crime statistics to make it look like crime was lower. And the way they did that was they just didn't arrest a lot of people for crimes. I mean, it's amazing what happens to the crime rate if you don't arrest anybody. It disappears. In one of these episodes of The Wire, in reaction to this pressure from above to turn in better crime numbers, I want to say a major in the police department named Bunny, yeah, that was his name, Bunny Colvin, big black guy. He said, this just isn't working. What if we just section off a hunk of the territory under my command, make sure that peaceful, good residents are evacuated, give them a place to stay. And then what if we just close this off with police cars at every entrance around this 6-8 block area, however big it was, and let them do what they want inside the 6 or 8 blocks, especially sell drugs. And this is, by the way, the libertarian position is, people ought to be able to do whatever they want. Well, at first it worked. And he didn't tell anybody else in the department that this was going on. It was very hush hush. And, it's working. And all of a sudden, violence in the district was way down and murders were down and all this other stuff. And it seemed to be pretty good. And all the druggies were contained in this area that they misunderstood. They called it Hamsterdam, like the hamster on a wheel. Hamsterdam, not understanding it was Amsterdam, and Holland does this, right? They just let everything go. So for a while, it worked real well. And his rule was you just couldn't take anything out of the zone. I mean, you consume what you want there, but there couldn't be any fighting, couldn't be any murders. They cracked down real hard on any violence, so on and so forth. Well, that worked for a while until finally it spilled over and some murders occurred, and people began asking questions, and all of a sudden it just all fell apart because you cannot keep it bottled up like that and just say let people do what they want as long as it's within this zone, because sooner or later those people are going to in some way find a way to infect or affect other people with their crime and so forth. So anyway, I strongly recommend, if you can, to watch The Wire. Find the season that involves Bunny Coleman. Is that Colston? Colton. I don't know. Bunny's this sort of Colton Colston, something like that was his last name, as the major, because it's a very interesting, teachable moment about what happens when you do this stuff. Just let everybody kind of do their own thing. And it was also trying to get rid of some of the corruption associated with the police, that they have to turn the other way. And I mean, they know these guys are doing drugs all the time. That was the point. But they don't want the runners and they don't want the low guys. They wanted to get Anton Barksdale and the guys way high up. So they would let a lot of crime go on in order to get to the top guys, which is a long-running theme in these kinds of crime movies and crime shows. All right, we will pick up here next time. Actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do next time. Next time, we're going to read from the Patriot's History Reader, William Harper on academic freedom in 1902, and on the principles of progressive education. I think that'll be the next logical step we go to before we continue with this on page 5. Let's see, 515, 516. We're on page 516 when we end. Okay, so I'll see you next time. We'll pick up with those two documents.